Good evening and welcome to this live with myself, Saj Hussain. Ask me anything about property investing. I'm here every Monday evening at 8:30 p.m. for about 30 minutes to answer your questions around investing in property. We're live on various different platforms on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. So whichever platform you're watching on, if you've got a question for me, make sure you put it in the comment section below the post, and then we'll do our very best to answer that for you. I will answer the questions in the order that they appear. So if you've got a burning question, make sure you've got it asked nice and early. I had a couple of messages today to say that I've not answered their question. They've asked a couple of times. There's only so much time we have this evening. We allocate about half an hour to do this. So get your questions in nice and early if you've got a question you want me to answer, and I'll do, as I said, my very best to get that answered. So I have my lovely assistant Khalid who will fire up the question on the screen as and when he receives those as well. So why am I here? I'm here really to use this time to help people with their property investing journey. I get asked quite a lot and I get messaged about questions around investing in property. So I find this is the easiest way for me to be able to help and serve you to be able to get these questions answered. Now, obviously, with a session like this, they're fairly high-level questions. We can't go into the detail because I'm not kind of asking you the questions to get a little bit deeper, but hopefully it gives you enough and gives you a little bit of an idea in terms of some support and around your question. I do have a mentoring program, which is a 12-month-long program where the purpose of that is to be able to help you achieve your objectives over a period of 12 months. And so here really it's just a high level to help you get further faster in your property investing journey. So let's get started with our first question this evening. As I said, whichever platform you're watching, I'll make sure you pop in the question section below and we'll get that answer as soon as we can. So first question is on YouTube. Coxie, my apologies if I pronounce that incorrectly. Hi Saj, thank you for taking the time to put out all the highly valuable but free content. My question is, what is the typical running cost of a 5-bedroom HMO? So thank you so much for that question, first of all, and thank you for watching the content. It's nice producing it, but it's even nicer when I know people are watching it, enjoying it, liking it. In fact, let me know in the comment section if you watch the vlogs as well, the weekly vlogs, and what you think of those, just to give me some feedback with those. So coming back to your question, in fact, this is good timing. I think it's this coming Wednesday. I've got a video on YouTube where I answer this question in a lot more detail. But what I'll do is I'll give you a sort of top level answer. So when it comes to the running costs, what I do is think about operational costs. So you've got your mortgage or your rent payment, if it's a rent-to-rent that you're going to be paying each month. And then you've got your day-to-day operational costs. Your operational costs will be your gas, electric, water, council tax, TV license, cleaners, gardeners, internet. All of these are your typical running costs. Now, depending on the property, you might have some costs will be higher and lower than others, and some you may not even have. So, for example, you may have a property that has no gardening that needs to be done, then obviously you don't have those gardening costs. And in some properties, you might have a huge garden as well. But what we tend to do is, because we manage hundreds and hundreds of properties across Birmingham and been doing this for about 10 years, we've got a huge amount of experience. So what we think the average running costs are. What we tend to do is use a figure of around £85 per person. So on a typical 6-bedroom house, which is what most of mine are, it tends to work out to be about £510. So we tend to average it at about £500 per month. Now, if you looked at our running costs accurately, say in August, and you looked at our running costs accurately in January, they're probably going to be different. And the reason for that is predominantly your gas and electric that will vary throughout the year. So the gas will be and electric will be much, much lower in the summer and much higher in the winter. Obviously, the lights are used much more, because it gets darker earlier and it's colder, so the heating's on more. But when you average it out throughout the year, that's what it typically works out to be. And that's the figures that we tend to use. So if it's a 5-bed, we would just take 85 times 5. And if it was a much bigger one, like a 7 or 8-bed, we still use the same figure, although you start getting economies of scale. So for example, your internet, your council tax is not really going to be any more for more bedrooms in the house necessarily, if it's slightly bigger or slightly smaller, but it gives you an idea of what that is. So I hope that helps. I hope that answers your question, but look out for that video on Wednesday where we're going to go into much more detail and I'll break down the numbers there for you too. So we'll get our next question up on the screen in just a moment. So the next one is also on YouTube, which is from Segun. And the question is, hi Saj, want to go into JV with a friend. However, he has taken a bounce back loan. He was told this by his accountant, but in hindsight, he wouldn't have. What could we do as lenders don't use it? So bounce back loans really are are there and were created to be able to help businesses through struggling times. It's not really for buying assets. It's to pay wages, it's to pay suppliers, pay your rent, just to keep going and during a challenging time. And if you're using bounce back loans to buy property, you can use the cash to do the purchase. But later on, if you come to remortgage, you'll find you might start having some problems around that. Now, ultimately, it depends how you've got the business set up. So, for example, if you've got a company that you've set up, you and your business partner, and they've lent the money from their company to this new company, and it's gone from there. You've got a purchase. Really, you want to know who you're getting into bed with, as it were, where that money is coming from. But you do need to be mindful that that might potentially cause you a problem. Some people I know have been talking about using it for renovating the property as opposed to the purchase side of it. So, you purchase it using your own funds, and you might use some of that money to do a renovation, to refinance it. Ultimately, you have to think about what you think is the right thing for you. I think using bounce back loans in property purchases can cause you problems going forward, so it's not necessarily recommended. And of course, if you think it's going to be a problem in your account, you could always repay it if it's just sitting there in your account not being used anyway, because there'll be no penalties. You can just repay the loan. Hope that helps with that, Sigan. We'll get our next question up in a moment. So our next question is also on YouTube. Chelsea Dunn. My apologies again. I am absolutely terrible when it comes to pronunciation of names. Hey Saj, recently saw your joint venture with Samuel Leeds, inspiring. What are your thoughts on Samuel as a fake or legitimate property investor? Please, any reason for the media backlash against him? So an interesting question. First of all, just as a little clarification, so Samuel didn't joint venture with me. He lent the money for a property project that I was doing. So just a quick distinction, first of all, between what's the difference between a joint venture and a loan. The joint venture is where we're sharing the risk and the rewards. So, for example, if the project does really well, your partner also benefits more than they maybe initially anticipated. And if it doesn't do as well, they also suffer in that transaction. With a loan, the amount is fixed, the period is fixed, and the return is fixed. So really, regardless of how the project turns out, it's better, worse, whatever it might be, it doesn't affect the lender. Very much like, say, for example, how a bridging loan would work or how your mortgage lender would work. If you're getting more rent, your mortgage company is not going to ask you for more money. And if you're running some voids and you're not getting any rent in, at the same time, your lender, your mortgage company is still going to ask you to make the monthly mortgage payments. And so because they're loans, they're not part of the project, they're not joint ventures. In the same way, Samuel lent the money for the project. This was done some time ago. For the project on a fixed return. So whether I make 50 grand, 100 grand, 150 grand, it has no impact or bearing on Samuel. The return for him was fixed on that particular project. In terms of a backlash and things, but I think, look, I'm not going to badmouth Samuel. I've known him for many years. I first met him when he came along to one of my network meetings, probably maybe 8-ish years ago, something like that, when I first met him. I think we all need to make up our own mind, do our own research in terms of what we think is right or who's the right person for us to work with. As I said, I'm not gonna badmouth him for sure. But when we're picking for somebody to learn from, I think it's up to us to do our own due diligence. As many times I've investing, I still continue to do so in myself by having mentors and guides that help me grow my property business, whether that's sales, whether that's the property marketing, investing, whatever it might be. I have a number of people that help me grow my business, but there's also many people I've had as help and support over the years that maybe haven't performed, or the relationship hasn't worked the way I thought it would be. But ultimately, I take responsibility for those things. So a bit of a long-winded answer, but I hope that's given you my thoughts on that anyway. So next question that we have is also on YouTube. YouTube is on fire again. Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, where are you? Where's your questions? If you're watching on those platforms, make sure you get a question in, so we'll get onto that in a moment. So a question from Jamie. Hi Saj, I'm purchasing a property with a poor energy performance rating, i.e. less than an E rating. Can I negotiate on the price, and how much by percentage? Your thoughts? So Jamie, this is something you're going to come across if you're looking to buy a property and you're going to rent it straight out. And let's say you're using a buy-to-let mortgage, it's very likely that your buy-to-let lender may object to the fact that it can't be rented out straight away, and hence causes a problem. It's not lettable right away. And what that means is it could be classed as unmortgageable, whereas really it's a simple fix. It's just the energy performance certificate is inadequate. So what you've got to do is look at the energy performance certificate. I'm assuming it's one of the old ones rather than one of the very latest ones they started in the last few weeks. Look at the certificate, and it will give you some suggestions on things that you can do to improve the rating if they're fairly easy to do. So, for example, sometimes it can be insulate the loft, put energy efficient bulbs in the property. Just these little things can push it up slightly. And of course, it has the contact details of the person that issued the certificate. So you could always give them a ring or send them an email and just have a chat with them. Say, look, this is a property you've done an EPC on 5, 6, 7, 9 years ago, whatever it was. And this is what the suggestions. I'm just looking for some guidance on what I can do, and I'll probably need a new certificate soon, so I'll definitely get back in touch with you to do that for me. And of course, they're likely to be helpful and give you some pointers. So if it's a few simple things like that, it's not going to amount to very much anyway, a few £100, and you can change the rating. So it shouldn't really be a big issue. On the other hand, it could be that actually you need to spend quite a bit of money. Maybe you need to replace the heating system, you need to put some double glazing in to really try and get that lifted up. In that case, you get a guide for how much that's going to cost you. Let's say it's going to cost you £3 grand on the double glazing. It's going to cost you a couple of grand on the heating system. That's £5 grand, and you could, maybe knock off £6, £7 grand for the cost of getting the work done. Your hassle in terms of doing it, you could negotiate that. It all depends on how many other people might be interested in that market, and when the seller is going to accept that, or whether they're going to pull back and they're going to say, no, I'd rather just not accept that and go elsewhere. So there's quite a few variables to think about there. It's not that straightforward. Of course, if it is a minor thing, the other thing you can do, and you find that property is not mortgageable, you could agree with the lender to get those things done and get a new EPC certificate before completion happens, in which case you should be able to still get the mortgage as a normal buy-to-let mortgage, because you can, with the agreement of the seller, get a few things done or get them to pay for a few things to improve the EPC rating, hence making it mortgageable and allowing you to complete on that transaction. So, Jamie, hope that helps. Our next question we have this evening, again on YouTube, from Gary. Hi Saj, I'm looking on converting a 5-bedroom house into a 6-bedroom HMO located in Article 4 area. Would it be possible to gain planning permission? Plus, what will be the first steps? Thanks. So, Gary, I was on a webinar just a few days ago with Birmingham City Council planners were there, people from licensing, there were city councillors there, member of parliament there. They're really talking about HMOs in Birmingham and the impact it has on the people and the residents, and how that works. So they're also doing planning, they're doing like a pilot. And what they're essentially saying is where you don't have too many HMOs already, where they're fairly sparse, you're probably going to be okay in terms of being able to get planning permission for those in the Birmingham area. But if you're going to go into one of these areas where there's already lots of HMOs, for example, Selly Oak, Edgbaston, Erdington, these kind of areas, there's literally hundreds and hundreds of HMOs, and in some streets they are just all HMOs. They are going to resist heavily in terms of allowing you to convert that house into a HMO. So that's what I think you need to think about. It's still quite early to say. June was the new changeover when Birmingham switched over to Article 4. And there probably isn't enough volume of applications going through planning yet for us to get a little bit of a guide in terms of how the planners are reacting to some of these applications. It certainly is going to be possible. It's not going to be impossible. Some areas are going to be exceptionally difficult, and I would look at the easier areas rather than where there's difficulty. And if you think about why we want to go for the easy areas, why is it we want to go to Edgbaston and places like that? Well, the reason is because there's a strong established demand. There are lots of people already looking. It's like setting up, let's say you open a cafe, you want to open a coffee shop up. Are you going to put that coffee shop in a very busy parade where you've got lots and lots of footfall, or you're going to put it on a quiet little side street? Well, if you put it in a very busy location, then you almost guarantee business because there's people there already going past the shop. In the same way, if you put it in the right place, i.e. say certain parts of Edgbaston, there's an active demand in that area. Whereas if you go off to one of these quieter areas, demand might be much more limited. And this is where you need to do the research to make sure that works. So we've got HMOs scattered around Birmingham, but we've got a lot of our properties are in the key locations and key postcodes, but we will do a lot of research before we will go off into one of these other areas in terms of setting up a property there, because what we don't want to do is make an investment of £200,000-400,000 and then find the house to somewhere, because that would be very expensive, very painful. So Gary, hope that helps. That gives you some pointers there. So let's get our next question up. Another one on YouTube. I think everybody else seems to be asleep. Game King, do you do one-to-one mentoring? I do mentoring. I wouldn't call it one-to-one. What I tend to do is have a personal plan that we put together at the beginning for you in terms of what it is that you want to achieve, and then we work out a strategy of how is it that we're going to achieve that plan. Then that roadmap essentially is what I help and support you implement over a period of 12 months, and also with my team helping you with that as well. So yes, you get lots of support from me, but then it also tends to be my team helping and supporting you with that as well. If you're interested in learning more about my mentoring, just ping me a message and I can send you some details on that. So let's get the next question up on screen. Alex says, hi Saj. Hi Alex. What would you say is the best investment strategy right now? This is a very good question, Alex. There's many things that you need to think about, there's many factors that you need to consider before you work out which is the right strategy. It's really not that easy to answer and say, oh, right now you want to be doing this. There's certain things I can talk about and say which may not be the right strategy right now. So for instance, I'm based in Birmingham, and I'm not really actively looking for below market value property, massively discounted property. I'm not saying I would turn my nose up to it if it appeared, but what I'm saying is it's not really that market right now. So if I'm looking for those, I'm trying to find a needle in a haystack, because it's a strong market. There's very little stock on the market. Everything's selling very quickly. So to find B&V properties, especially 25, 30%, is really going to be very, very difficult to do. Not impossible, very difficult. In the same time, if I think about lease options, is lease options a good strategy to use? Well, when's the best time for lease options for them to work? Lease options work really well when the seller of a property doesn't need any money from that transaction. So what that means is that they're going to move on from that property, but not necessarily put any cash in their pocket, or not put significant amounts of money in their pocket. That allows you to take on and control the property, free them up from the property, but without them actually getting any money. But again, that normally works well when the market's really slow, properties are difficult to sell, it's you've got negative equity. So see, certain circumstances mean that certain strategies work well. So now in Birmingham, one of the things that we've been doing, so what's been working really well for us, or for HMOs, we've been doing for a very long time, high quality HMOs at top end of the market, premium rents, and then also developments, whether that's adding an extension, a loft to a house, or whether that's doing a massive renovation, or whether that's building a house out the ground. Because what we're able to do is add the value as opposed to get the value when we buy the property. So when you buy a property below market value, let's say it's £100,000 property, and you manage to buy it at 75,000, you've locked in £25,000 of profit on day one. So you've made your money on day one. But because we can't do that, so this is where we're looking to add value at the properties and looking at cash flow. So before you can ask a question about what is the right strategy, I have to ask a number of other questions about where you're based, how much time you're looking to put into this, how much money are you coming with, how mortgageable are you, could you raise other funds, what experience do you already have, what skill sets are you going to bring? And all of these factors need to be considered, as well as your location and the timing of the economy. So, for example, what's going on in Birmingham right now may be very different to what's happening in London, which may be very different to what's happening in Newcastle. So all these factors need to be considered before you can work out which is the right strategy. And I've got a video on my YouTube channel, which is probably about 3 years old now, this video, where I talk about finding the right strategy, and I talk about all these things. And I think people often don't take enough time to think about which is the right strategy. They see somebody else doing well and say, that's the strategy for me. But the reality is you've got to find the right strategy for you with the circumstances, time in the market, and everything else as well. So a bit of a general answer, but I hope that helps a little bit in terms of what you need to think about in terms of finding the right strategy for yourself. So let's get our next question up on the screen. So next one is on YouTube. Trifecta Asset Management Limited. Hi Saj, I'm a new investor with £60,000 to invest in HMO using BRRR strategy. What area would you start investing in if you live down South London? Well, first of all, I'm glad I don't live in the South, because it can be quite challenging. Prices are much higher, then you've got to think about what's that worth. So if you're looking at, say, I don't know, I'm just going to pick a random number, £600,000 houses, then £60,000 is not going to go very far. I would probably, if you want to do HMOs, and you have to think about why you want to do HMOs, and if HMOs you want to do for cash flow purposes, then it may be that you're not purchasing them and renovating them, and because you've got to add significant value. It may be you're looking at, say, rent to rent, for example. So you're taking on a property, spending a little bit of money on it, making sure it's compliant, and then what you're doing at that point is just taking the cash flow. If you want to purchase something Well, actually, let me give you some of our numbers to help create some context around this. So typically, we'll buy a property for, say, 160, 170,000, going up to 250,000 around Birmingham. So let me just use a round number. Let's say we bought it for 200,000. We would typically spend about 100 to 120,000 pounds renovating that house. Now, that will create all ensuite rooms, it will strip the property back to brick, whatever works need be doing to that property to create a stunning finish and a really desirable rentable property. Now, that might value up once it's finished. So we've spent 300 at this stage, 200 to buy, 100 to convert it. We've spent around £300,000. Our valuation is probably going to be in the region of 400, depending on where it is and how much rent that we're generating from that. So we've created significant uplift. Now, if we refinance that, we should be able to pull, pretty much all or most of our money out. We don't always get all the cash out, and that's essentially is what you're trying to achieve. But then we're starting with 200,000 purchase, 100,000 renovation. Now, even if we use bridging, because often we don't, we just buy for cash. And the way I do that is because I work with lots of investors, people invest with me, and that's how I have the cash to be able to do cash purchases. It's not I have an endless amount of cash in the bank. So if you're using bridging, for example, to buy the property, let's say it's a £200,000 property, and I suspect it's going to be significantly more down the south, but if a £200,000 property, you're putting a 25% deposit down, that's £50,000 straight away. And if you're using bridging, they're probably going to take all the interest up front, and you've got stamp duty to pay. So you probably need 70, 80, 90,000 pounds possibly in cash just to do the purchase part up to a £200,000 property. Then you need the other 100 grand to be able to do the renovation as well, to create a massive uplift so that you can refinance and get your money out of the property. I'm not saying this is the only way, this is how we do it. So when you look at it like that, the numbers don't work. At £60,000 is not going to be sufficient to do that. You can add a little bit of value, you can do you can put a few en suites in, improve the property. But are you going to get significant uplift? And the way I would do this, if what ultimately your objective is, which is what I think it is to be able to recycle the cash and keep going and get the cash out and go again and build up a portfolio that way, then really you need to start with the end goal in mind. The end goal in mind is I need to refinance and get the cash out. So your starting point would to be sit down with a mortgage broker, a local broker that's active, that understands the market, that's doing this regularly, and learn from them what the typical valuations are, how are they valuing the properties, what are the key factors they will look at when it comes to a valuation, and then say, okay, this is what I could possibly achieve as an end valuation on a property. Then you work the numbers backwards and say, okay, this is how much I could probably buy the building for that would need to be converted. This is how much I would need to spend. This is how much equity I need in it to make it work. And that's how you work the numbers out. As I said, I suspect it's probably going to be more difficult down the south because the price is just much, much higher. So you'd either need more cash or you go further north, and there'd be, I'm sure within an hour of where you are, there's probably cheaper areas that you can consider. So I hope that helps. I hope it gives you some idea with that. How we're doing for time? We're good. So let's get our next question up on the screen. So our next question is from Mohammed on LinkedIn. If you have a feasibility study for a plot new build development, how do you get investment? So Mohammed, great question. There's a little bit like how long is a piece of string, but let's try and answer that. So looking at your qualification with respect to your chartered surveyor, so you know what you're doing when it comes to looking at properties and valuations. And so that brings massive amount of credibility as well. So if you've got a plot of land, you've got a feasibility study on it, which means, it's like, in principle, you think this is what's possible with this site. And yes, there's some risk still involved in that because it hasn't been de-risked completely. You don't have planning, you don't have all the reports. It's not oven ready for a contractor to jump on tomorrow and start building it out. So if that hasn't happened, it's not at that stage, then it still has an amount of risk with it. So then you have to think about, if you're bringing somebody else's money in, what their appetite for risk is going to be. Now, in my experience, there's two types of investors. Investors that invest with you for the long term, in terms of they want a steady return. It might be 5, 6, 7% over a number of years. It's continuous. And then those are the one. And then there's those that want a much higher return, but they tend to be shorter. So, for example, they might get involved with flip projects with me or short-term lending on projects, and it might be 10 or 12%, but it's generally within a year. So, even if you go out to look for development finance or bridging, typically you're going to be about 1%. 1% a month, so 12% a year. Plus, you've got other costs, you've got legal costs, you've got broker costs, you've got setup costs, valuation, legals, etc., etc. When you average all that out, you're probably 14, 15% in terms of cost of money. So you've got to build this into your project. Now, regardless of where the money comes from, you've got to work out a cost of money to do that project. So then it's about approaching people to have a conversation with them. based on their appetite for risk. And I have got a video, a fairly lengthy video, where I go into this in a lot of detail in terms of how to raise money, the things you need to be asking, the questions. If you ping me a message, I'll send you a link to that video about what questions to ask, how to speak to investors, how to get investment for your property deals. It is on YouTube. You probably find it somewhere on my channel as well. But the key thing is, you've got credibility because you're in the property industry, you're a qualified expert, you've got the feasibility study. Then it's really about how much risk there is for somebody, because there's always risk. And I started off earlier talking about another project with a joint venture or a loan. If you bring in somebody who's in a joint venture partner, they're sharing the risk. And if you're bringing the money in as a loan, then actually you're taking all the risk, and you have to assess how comfortable you are with that risk. So I hope that helps with that. So let's get the next question up on the screen. So next one's from Andrew on LinkedIn. Very interesting points. I deal a lot with property investors, both commercial and private. So this is great advice I can pass on to them. As a company, we manage vacant properties generally in short-term basis via the use of property guardian model. Is this something you've previously experienced with? Any thoughts would be greatly appreciated. So thanks for the question, Andrew. I think by guardian property model, you mean where people come in and look after the property, an empty property for no cost. So Khalid, so that's fine. So I was just going to ask Khalid to remove the question, because you could just see my eyes then rather than the rest of me. So guardians being people that will come and stay in the property. You don't pay them. They look after the property, so it's occupied rather than unoccupied, which will hopefully prevent it from being vandalized, broken into, squatters taking it over, etc., etc. So it's not something I have any experience of or ever been involved with. I can see the benefit of it, especially for bigger commercial buildings where they're open and easy to kind of break into, and big buildings where the owners may be going through planning, so they need to just leave it there. They can't do anything else with it. So I don't have any experience of it. I think it's an interesting model. A lot of our short-term lets that we do tend to be the kind of Airbnb type model with short-term serviced accommodation. A lot of contractors we work with, especially from Europe, coming into, say, working at Jaguar Land Rover and various other key employers, and we provide accommodation for them, on a month, 6-week type basis, 2 months for their contractors and their staff. That's how we tend to use the short stay model. So thanks for that question, Andrew. So next question we have is coming up on the screen in a moment. Trillion Beats on YouTube. Hi Saj, I have 60k and about to get my first residential mortgage. I'm putting a 40k deposit down and have roughly 20,000 left to invest in buy-to-let property. How would you invest at £20,000? So Trillion, I think ultimately depends, as I was talking about earlier on, with what is the outcome ultimately you're trying to achieve? Where is it you're trying to get to with that 20,000? And it's being realistic. I've been involved in property about 15 years now, and unfortunately there's too many people in our industry that just sell dreams to dreamers. They're not realistic about what's possible, what you can achieve. Yes, you can achieve some amazing things. There's some very smart strategies you can use, but you also need to be realistic, and many of them are quite challenging to implement, but the rewards can be massive if you persist with them. So thinking about, what is it you're trying to achieve with that? If you're trying to build a buy-to-let portfolio, that 20,000 isn't going to go very far. It'll probably get you another deposit down, and maybe your first buy-to-let purchase. That'll give you a trickle income each month, and hopefully over time they'll give you some capital growth. But then what? Then you'll grind to a halt. You won't be able to move any further. And if, for example, you're looking to try and create some cash flow, then really I would look at either the rent to HMO or rent to service accommodation type models, which mean you don't need to put a huge amount of money down, but you can start moving quickly and start generating some income from those. The other strategy I normally suggest with a low amount of starting point is sourcing. But right now, as I was saying earlier on, there's very little stock in the market. The market's very strong, it's very active, so it's quite difficult to find good quality stock. I had a message from somebody earlier today on one of my social media platforms asking me to whether we source property or whether I recommend any sources. And I said, look, we're not sourcing any property right now for others, because we're actively sourcing property. But if it's any good, we take it on for ourselves. If it's not, we don't offer anybody else, because if it's not any good, why would we sell it to somebody else? That's the first point. And secondly, in terms of recommending somebody else, I think there's too many sources that just sell rubbish deals, or they don't really understand the numbers properly. And when you really dig deep into them, the deal just falls apart. It's just not being stacked very well because they don't have the experience to do that. I'm not saying that's the case for everybody. There are very few good sources out there. When the market is much slower, let's say we look back at the the credit crunch 10, 12 years ago when the market really slowed down, there were massive opportunities to source. That's when I got really active at sourcing, got really good. But the reality was it was an easy playing field at that time. You know, there was like, you just tripped over deals every day because everybody was trying to sell. I said everybody, lots of people were trying to sell and there were very few buyers. But right now we're on the opposite side of that. So it's difficult to source stock in that way. So I'm not sure how I got into that. I can't remember what the question was, but hopefully that was useful, what I just said. Let's see if we can get one more question on before we wrap up. So Kyle, if you get the last question on for me. So last one is from Kevin, which is on YouTube, Kevin Jacob. Hi Saj, one more question. What are the disadvantages of buying a leasehold property over freehold as an investment? Can we make changes to leasehold properties to increase value? So Kevin, again, a very good question. So the main advantage of a freehold over a leasehold is you have complete control and ownership of that property. You can do what you want with it, whether it's a house or whether it's an apartment. When it's a leasehold, really you have rights over that property as opposed to really ownership. So there's other people that will have ownership or other companies that are involved who will have a say on what can happen to that property. So for example, when they talk about a 100-year lease, that means you're renting the property for 100 years. Theoretically, after 100 years, it would go back to them because you're only renting it. 100 years is a very long time, you know, which is why properties have significant value. But when the leases start getting short, like 50 years, 40 or 30 years, and the leases start dropping, that's why the prices start dropping significantly, because it's getting closer to that period where the lease would expire. Now, you know, it doesn't happen where the property goes back to the owner. You know, you have rights to be able to extend it, but you have to pay for those rights. So there's somebody else involved and has something over you in terms of control of that particular property. Now, let's say it was an apartment, which is how most properties, apartment properties are. They're leasehold. In fact, you don't really want a freehold apartment because it presents other problems around mortgages on that particular property. So if you want to change the apartment, you want to knock down a wall, you know, make some of the changes, you have to get permission from the freeholders or people that manage the building. If you want to use it for, like, say, service accommodation, generally you have to check whether you're allowed to do that within your agreements. So you see, you have control over a property for a period of time, but you don't have complete ownership to do as you please. So that's probably the most simplest way I can explain that. In terms of, can you add value to lease properties? Absolutely you can. There's many ways to do that. So for example, I talked about the number of years reducing on a lease over time. So you start off with a 100-year lease, next year it's going to be 99, year after it's going to be 98. So slowly we're dropping down. And so you can buy leasehold properties with shorter leases, and there's methods you can use to extend those leases again back up to a much longer period, making them mortgageable again and making them more valuable. You just have to understand the numbers on how to do it so you don't overpay at the beginning and be able to add value. Another way, for example, would be you could take a spacious one-bedroom leasehold flat, and you could turn it into a two-bedroom flat, and depending on the location, probably increase the value that way as well. So yes, with leasehold properties, it is possible to increase the value, but ultimately you don't have complete control. There's other people that will have a say what happens to that property that you need to think about. So I hope that helps. So just I want to say thank you so much. You know, I'm here every Monday at 8:30 p.m. answering your question. I'm being in my home office this evening rather than our office. But either way, you know, I'm here Monday 8:30 to answer your questions, to help you ultimately get further faster in your property investing journey. I have 3 videos a week on YouTube. You know, we have this Q&A. We also have like a teaching video on a Wednesday, which this week is going to be around HMOs and costing, and then we have a vlog on a Friday as well. So if I can help you in any way, make sure you reach out to me, send me a message on my various social media platforms. You can generally get me at the Saj Hussain on various platforms. And I just want to say thank you again so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you here next Monday at 8:30. Thank you.